What we have here is a panel that's on effective response and how it would hasten relief and recovery. And we have 4 responders and presenters reacting to our keynote presentation. The first is our local tsunami queen, Laura Kong, who's the director of the International Tsunami Information Center. And in that capacity, she works closely with many governments in the region, with our state, with a real focus on tsunami detection, warning, and mitigation systems. Laura's also one of my favorite persons because she also went to Brown and to MIT, to excellent schools of higher education. But anyway, so with that, I'll turn it over to Laura to give her presentation and response. Thank you.
I had not known him until about 2009-ish, 8-ish, when we were both at a seminar that was speaking to the Indonesian response after the 2004 tsunami. And it was actually at that time that it was a revelation that we both went to the same university but not at the same time. But ITIC is also one of the partners of NDPTC in the sense that we partnered with them to develop the tsunami awareness course, which perhaps many of you know about. Okay. So, in thinking about how to respond to this panel, we kind of got the guidance that we were supposed to listen to the keynotes and then provide a response to those presentations. But thanks to Carl, I never got that information until perhaps about 4 o'clock yesterday. So what I would like to do is maybe pull back and give a few slides that I put together on just general response and how we think about response as being the key to a successful recovery. And then at the end, I'll just add a few notes in terms of what Pacific Disaster Center does with tsunamis. So let's start. I'm technically challenged. Okay. So in many ways, what I put together has nothing to do with tsunamis. It's equally applicable to an earthquake, a flood, any kind of disaster. And where we talk about this, and many of you have seen this slide on the right, is this whole cycle of how if we are to do better the next time after an event, we want to recover, and in recovery we put in the mitigation and the preparedness so that the next time this happens we respond better. So really we want to think of it as a holistic approach. We want to think of it not just one particular institution, but many institutions working together, which run the gamut of everything from social media all the way to news media and the very warning centers that are providing the science-based threat assessment. If we do it right, our effective response means there are lives that are saved, especially for tsunami, where we're going to think about something that happens in tens of minutes. We're going to hopefully have less impact because all our buildings are better made, all our critical infrastructure is well protected, all our communications are reliable or redundant. And what I also want to say is our response means that our early warning system does work. And that's the key for responding better, which means better reduced or less work that we have to do for recovery because we have better structures, more robust communications, we have prepared communities that are educated and aware and know what to do and where to go. So what I want to just emphasize as part of my contribution to this panel is that when we talk about preparedness, early warning, that early warning system is part of it. And when we talk about response, that early warning system is part of that response. If we talk about the big holistic picture, we talk about disaster risk reduction and the things that we have to do for mitigation, whether it's in the planning arena and putting in ordinances, whether we think about hard or soft technical measures of putting in the sense of what we saw in Japan, seawalls, or putting in evacuation maps. Those are part of the mitigation efforts. When we talk about preparedness, the things having to do with education and awareness to build in knowledge of what these technical measures are and the plans for our response officials when an event does occur. So early warning, I'd like to say that it's part of the preparedness effort. It goes on before the disaster, but if we do this right, we're going to respond better. So I think is that 5 minutes? I have a few more slides, but I'm not allowed.
No, you can do one or two more.
No, I'm good.
All right, okay. Thank you, Laura. Okay. All right, our second speaker is Tom Peterman, and he's a professor with Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and he's worked throughout the region. An interesting factoid about Tom is that he also speaks Chinese, and he's been a great friend of our center, and he's very, very knowledgeable about security issues, about disaster management, and also conflict resolution. So, not that we have any conflicts on this panel. Tom?
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, everyone. I thought well, first off, I want to thank the three presenters for very, very informative and interesting briefings. And I know I'm supposed to comment on them, but I figured that all four of us, if we commented on them, would be saying the same thing. So since I'm at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, I thought I'd go ahead and kind of present what Asians, most of our fellows that come, what they think of what we do in the disaster management field, how the United States or Western countries respond and recover. And this is over probably about the last 6 or 7 years of getting feedback from them. And unfortunately, we don't do very well, at least according to very, very many people in Asia. And I just thought I'd touch upon 4 points where they think we don't do very well, basically in response and recovery, but in also preparation and mitigation. And I'd like to touch upon scale, focus, technology, and tiered response. When Asians look at disasters, and as you know, Asia is the most disaster-prone area in the world. They think we only have emergencies. There's no such thing as a disaster, and even Katrina only killed around 2,000 people, and the 9/11 attack was 3,000 plus. But when you talk about disasters in Asia, you're talking about 500,000 people in Bangladesh in 1971, or 275,000 people in 2004 in the tsunami, or 95,000 in the Pakistan earthquake. You're talking about huge numbers of people. We have no concept of how to grasp that fact, and no concept of how to react to something that large. And so they say, we don't have disasters here in the United States. We have emergencies, which they feel that we do very, very well at a local level. When it goes large, like Katrina, where you have to go from local to state and federal, we don't do so well, and they recognize that fact. And that brings me to the second point of focus, and if you don't mind, I'll just refer to my notes just so I can stay on time. And very interesting on the Minnesota bridge collapse, they were very, very impressed on the response on that. But then they're scratching their head saying, well, yeah, but you have another 75,000 bridges that are in the same condition. What are you going to do about those? And are you going to wait until something happens with those and have millions of dollars, in response after that? So they're saying, you're the richest country in the world. How come you're not doing something about this? And also they look, and I hate to bring up Katrina again because we all know some of the problems there. Cuba, that same hurricane that went through, Cuba lost 2 people. We lost over 2,000. And it was just because they were doing it a heck of a lot better than we were doing it. So they kind of scratch their head and say, no, we don't get it. And I have to somewhat agree to it. Now, I think one of the reasons is we don't have that many disasters. If you're sitting in Bangladesh or Philippines or Vietnam, you have disasters every year. And so they get used to doing things. We only have them once in a while. And even our earthquake-prone zones of California, that's a slip fault type earthquake that really doesn't match anything that they have over in Asia, much less. I'd like to talk about technology is because, and Chris, thank you for the briefing on PDC. They are very impressed with the technologies that the Americans and Europeans can give them. That's one of the things that they don't have, the technological expertise, and it's one of the things that they really appreciate, both from PDC and TWC and stuff like this. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the tier system. I know most of our countries in Asia and here in the or regions here in the United States, you know, it goes community, local, state, and federal. In a large disaster, they say that does not work. You have to get the national government involved right off the bat if it's going to be quick response. One thing, the local people may be wiped out, and you may not get anything for a while, any word that a disaster has happened. So they see that as very, well, let's just say not very useful. China, I think, Dennis, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that kicks in about 200 people dead. The national government becomes immediately involved and will start pushing supplies and pushing people. And so that type of model, you know, here in the United States, we would, if we're looking for a quick response to a large disaster, we may want to think about that. And with that, no.
Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is David Fukutomi, who works very closely with actually one of the partners for our consortium, which is the Naval Postgraduate School. David has held numerous positions with state and federal government and other agencies involved in many different aspects of disaster response and recovery. I've asked him to share some of his insights, both in terms of the presentations and where we should be going forward from here. David?
Thanks, Carl. Good morning. So I'm going to tie together some of the things that I heard from the speakers. In fact, the morning speakers were so good that they pretty much covered everything I took notes on. So I was just thinking I'm going to go straight to Rainbow and get my mixed plate now. So, anyways, 4 points, and I'll elaborate them in a second. The first one is all disasters are local, and I'll come back to that. The second one is that the response always ends, and believe me, the first responders know how to terminate a response. You know, they're demobilized, they're figuring out how to get out of there right away. But on the other hand, and particularly in the theme of this conference, you know, the recovery happens, but it doesn't always happen well unless there's deliberate planning involved and foresight, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the last point is the key of collaboration. The speakers this morning and the ones you'll hear later today have all touched on those points. But what do I mean by that? Well, again, I managed, I was a federal coordinating officer in one of my previous lives for FEMA. I ran the federal part of disaster operations and supported our state, local, territorial, and tribal partners everywhere from FSM and Guam and CNMI all the way to Virginia. And while certainly out here in the Pacific there are some unique circumstances, there's commonality in terms of successful elements of a response. What do I mean when I say local, you own it? Well, you don't ever escape it. You know, no matter how big the disaster gets, if the state becomes involved or the federal government becomes involved, the locals are still in charge. And as we heard from our just previous speaker, in terms, the key thing is not to worry about who's in charge, but how are you going to come together. But the locals own it. You know, the feds and the state are going to go away in a rather short period of time, depending on the size of the response. But the locals still own it, and they will own it until it ends, basically. So you can never escape your responsibility. I like to think of emergency management in our country sort of like a house for you architectural students. You know, the foundation is local government. That's the bedrock. That's what holds everything up, keeps it from shifting. The bearing walls, the walls are state government and regional organizations that rest on that bedrock, and the federal government is the roof. If the first two elements collapse, the federal government, the roof, will fall down on top of the situation and cover it, but as we saw in Katrina and other instances, it's not very effective. It's like using a chainsaw to do microsurgery. It's just not very precise and very effective, and that's clearly not the role of the federal government. Response and recovery planning. You know, prior to, say, the last 5 or 10 years, there hadn't been a lot of recovery planning at all, very little, and darn little response planning prior to something happened, just, you know, some off-the-shelf three-ring binder plan. I think it's important to note at this, where we are now and the lessons that we learned, that response and recovery planning have to be done together, and they need to be done in advance. And they need to be done in the cycle that Laura had up there, or any other model that you use, that you have to think about things sequentially, linearly, or whatever model you want to use, but they all need to be together. And I'll give you a good example of that. Take logistics out here in the Pacific. You heard my friend Vern Miyagi talk about 7 days for rice and toilet paper. Well, that's a bare minimum. You know, the first supplies are going to come on an air bridge, the most necessary things, and then backed up by sea as that gets restored. But what if the port of LA Long Beach, where a lot of your supplies come from, gets hit by something, an earthquake, as Tom mentioned, or perhaps a cyber attack that renders the infrastructure of our country unable to deliver? You really got to think ahead. The other thing is, because of that long chain of logistics out here, you have to plan ahead and decide, well, what do I want? Do I want water to keep people alive, or do I start shipping housing resources to sustain them? Those all need to be taken into consideration and prioritized, so you can't, point is, you can't separate response and recovery planning. And the last part, you know, is really about collaboration, as I mentioned, not who's in charge. That'll get sorted out right away, but how are you going to come together? Are you using NIMS? Are you using the National Response Framework? Do you know each other, as the first panel this morning talked about? Because believe me, that'll get sorted out, and you look at your resources, and let me ask, how many people are familiar with FEMA's whole community approach? All right. Well, as folks that are interested in this subject matter, that's a concept that I suggest you all look into. There's a lot of good information, and the current FEMA leadership, Administrator Fugate, is really pushing that. And it's a way of looking at your whole community, not as a problem, but to identify your challenges as a whole and use every resource in your community to solve the problems. Because here you can't, it's not like the mainland where you can drive to the next jurisdiction and get help. You're going to be self-dependent. You're going to be reliant upon leveraging what you have, regardless of whether it's state, regardless of whether it's local, regardless of whether it's federal. So if you talk about resiliency, your ability to absorb that shock that comes, that Carl mentioned in his opening remarks, and your ability to respond to that is going to be directly proportional to how well you collaborated and planned ahead of time, really. Those are the key aspects. Many of the speakers touched on them, as I mentioned, but that's the commonality of successful elements of responses. If you look carefully back at some of the most vibrant failures in our country, you'll see that you can start identifying where those elements were missing if you look close enough behind the curtain.
Great, thanks, David. Our next responder is Brad Morrell, senior partner with Booz Allen. Brad brings a really extensive background as involved with, a firefighter, a hazmat specialist, urban search and rescue, and has been involved with many different aspects of disaster response and recovery. So we're really fortunate to have him to share his insights on this morning's presentations and what he heard, what he didn't hear, and where we should go from here. Brad?
Thanks, Carl. So I was kind of marking off all the points I had as everyone else went, so now I'm down to a Catholic priest, a Mormon bishop, no, okay. So just to reiterate on a couple of the things that were said, as we do good preparedness planning, good response, good recovery, we increase resiliency in our communities. We increase the resiliency and we raise the threshold, inch by inch, foot by foot, or millimeter by millimeter, but we keep increasing that resiliency. That resiliency is with our responders, with our elected officials, with our public, with everybody involved. They get to know what's going on. And they get to know, to some degree, and someone mentioned it, I think, if we have a good sense and a good feeling that we know what the outcome will be, usually we feel better about it, unless we're on the Titanic. But we feel better. We say, okay, this is bad, but I'm probably going to survive. It's that unknown, right? Think about the unknowns that really screwed us up as a country. Anthrax, a couple days of what's going on, took us a while to sort it out and to come to balance. Columbine, I was out in Utah when the Columbine school shootings happened. That was a first at that level. We were caught, wait a minute, this is a whole new thing. And then, how many school shootings since then? They're all awful, but man, our police, they are dynamic and aggressive and they solve these quickly because we've dealt with these. So we keep increasing resiliency. As we keep doing this, I offer that resiliency, that's a key part of the recovery, that we need to build that in. And think of that as a great comparison I see is what the NTSB does when a plane goes down, whether there's 500 souls on board or 1 soul on board. It is an extensive process of review to see what happened, why it happened, how will we make it never happen again, whether that's through laws, whether that's through changes in requirements, whether that's through changes in processes or training, and a variety of things. So we make sure that these things don't happen again. Do we always go, for really big disasters, we have elaborate congressional panels that are formed and, you know, have to go in front of that big oak table and say, I'm sorry, Senator, I can't recall. But for certain events, I've been there, trust me, for certain events, we don't always do that. And we say, yeah, let's get together, let's bring everyone together and have a hot wash on this for a day or two. And we kind of talk about it, not even that, maybe it's a couple hours. Say, couldn't we put a little more due diligence in this? And also, let's hot wash our public and make sure they have lessons learned from that, because that helps to increase that resiliency as well and increase that threshold. And those NTSB investigations, if you ever read any of those reports, the facts that they find and the recommendations are extensive. And they've got a proven track record that it works, that you don't see many similar disasters repeated. When we talk about think of it from what terrorists want to do by man-made disasters. They want to, you know, for a variety of things, but they want to instill fear, panic, and loss of confidence in the government, right? And that's what a disaster will do if we don't make sure. So we need to make sure that we don't show that we have fear or panic, that we're ready, and that there's not a loss in confidence in the government, that we know. We don't need to have a plan we can't have a plan. I've gone through the cycles of planning where we'd write plans for every possible thing. I remember when I first started in the Fire Academy in Chicago, I literally had 4 volumes of the largest 3-ring binder you'd ever see of SOPs. But I had to memorize these. And it was like for everything. I mean, literally, I swear to God, there was a cat in the tree policy. And what you would do, and it went into the proper gloves you had to wear, and if you were scratched, and it was like, all right. Then there was these levels of thinking saying, we don't need that. It's common sense. Go up tree, get cat out of tree, don't get hurt. Got it. You hire professionals, you hire good people, you train them, you educate them, and you say, be prepared to come together, solve anything and everything in a collaborative environment, and you'll be okay. And you'll be able to do it. Make sure you've got the right equipment that you can communicate, and the right attitude that you can collaborate, and the right smarts, and you'll be able to solve it. So don't get hung up on, oh, we don't have a plan for that. We don't have a plan for that, but no, we have a plan for major events. So looking at how we can always come together. And then understanding the differences in the communities too. Every community within Hawaii, within the different states, within the different partners, have different levels of tolerance. So for me, I'd say in Chicago, call in at middle of the night, high-rise fire on the 60th floor. oh, this is fun. That's exciting. We're going to go do our job. Not getting worried about it. Call in a white powder or suspicious package in Washington, D.C. Yawn. Okay, number 18 this week. Got it. We do this. We know the process. Everyone knows what to do. We start talking about typhoons and Guam. The population says, yeah, got it. We've done this. It correlates, tolerance and understanding is not, and resiliency is not just directly correlated to dollars and wealth of the community. It's really correlated a lot specifically to the experience, the training, and the culture. And then you look at the example in Hawaii, talk about those other disasters. Think about this for Hawaii. The cable TV and the pay-per-view going down in Waipahu 10 minutes before the Pacquiao fight. Are we ready? That's all.
Thanks, Brad. In just a few minutes here, I heard a lot. I heard from Laura about the importance of detection and warning systems. From Tom, again, reiterating some of the points that Chris was making earlier about what a big problem we have in this region. It's not just the hazards that we're exposed to, but it's where the growth is occurring, the urbanization, the concentration and density of populations, as well as the hazards that they're exposed to. At the same time, David was reminding us of the importance of local. That disasters are local, and the locals own it, as he said. And Brad again really pointed to the importance of resilience across all the different disciplines that come together. And I'm really struck by the importance of thinking about our competence in government, and whether we're talking about a large natural disaster or an act of terrorism, this loss of confidence and ability to govern is a really critical issue that we have to think about. That's what I heard. Laura, Tom, Brad, David, did you hear anything else that stood out from either this morning's presenters or from the other panelists?
My turn.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think we just want to emphasize the big picture is about risk, and to determine at your local level or your global level what that risk is and what you want to tolerate. And it depends on the hazard, it depends on the infrastructure you have and your economies, and then you work from there. And then the other point is work together.
Great.
Well, I have to reiterate the comments from a lot of folks saying we need to work together, and we have to develop a culture of working together. And it's not the need to know, but the need to cooperate.
Yeah, just two other things. You know, many of the speakers talked about relationships. The worst thing that can happen, particularly here in the Pacific, is meeting folks that you're going to be working with for the first time. You know, Vern Miyagi talked about Aniki. Certainly, there's no excuse for not and looking at those that you need to collaborate with now and trying to make deliberate effort to get to know them in whatever setting is possible, because that's really a key. As Brad mentioned, you can overcome a lot of lack of a plan for that specific incident or threat by having the relationships. But the other thing that struck me too in a couple of the presentations was you saw that there's no lack of information now, particularly compared to say 15, 20 years ago, even 10 or 5 years ago. The problem is going to be for somebody like me or Rocco or others that were on the ground is managing that information and figuring out what to do with it. What's important? What do I need to know? How is that going to affect decisions that are made out there? Sometimes that information, and this is kind of my point, sometimes that information is not known yet. You know, former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld used to say the known and the unknown. Well, the unknown may be important, but if you don't know what to ask for, or don't know that it's out there, I think, you know, there's a difference between a lot of information available, like during the Katrina response, no shortage of information from the talking head, but how much of it was actionable and how much of it was usable to be able to respond to the critical needs that were out there. think about it that way.
I think we've got a truly unique and fortunate situation for collaboration in Hawaii that's completely different than anywhere else, I'd say, in the world, where you have the heads of all the service components of the militaries, the Army, the Navy, Marines, and the Air Force for the region, the Joint Combatant Commander, the PACOM Commander, the Federal with Coast Guard and the DHS and the interagency, and then all of the state, local, county, from the major urban areas, all on one rock. And we see each other. And the current TAG, General Wong, was talking one time with one of the other admirals that had just come on, and he had said to her, we may not always agree, but we don't have the luxury of not getting along, because we see each other multiple times throughout the week at events and venues, and we all do. So we do collaborate, we do coordinate. It really is unique, though, that anywhere else in the United States, even in the foreign partners, all of those seats and all those key partners that are responding are scattered in all different areas, and trying to get them and their stabs together all the time, it's logistically hard to do. We're very fortunate to have that, and we do leverage that well, and continuing to do that, and taking advantage of the access that we have here and the way the partners work together, and showcasing that in other areas is always real beneficial, I think. And it's a good example in Hawaii.
Okay. Good comments. There are about 200 people in this room. I'm sure some of you have thoughts or ideas that you want to express, perhaps questions either to the panelists or other statements that you would like to make. Vance, go ahead.
I'll just speak loudly. How about the role of the private sector? Walmart, Target, they show up with water and blankets before the federal guys even get assembled. What's their role?
So this is one of the things I checked up on there, man. It's great. We are, in emergency services and in the government side, we are great at deploying teams and giving aid. We stink at receiving teams and receiving aid. And we have processes to do it, but the thing that we think about often is getting the word out of what we actually need to the right people to get the right stuff, and then how to get in. One of the first things I had to do at World Trade Center, I got there with my urban search and rescue team, was unload an entire semi of airplane packages of pretzels that Anheuser-Busch donated. I'm like, I have this elite urban search and rescue team, I'm throwing boxes of pretzels and I'm swearing every word, what am I doing? Why? Because the truck was in the way and they dropped the truck. They thought they were helping, and all my guys' hands are dirty. I'm like, don't touch those pretzels. But, we got to figure out how to do that, and the private sector is so key. We can learn. We certainly can learn supply chain logistics and management from that. So I think it's key there.
In the collaborative planning model, deliberate planning and the use or encompassing a whole community approach, really that's the fundamental tenet in there about looking at, it's not just what their needs are, it's what can they bring to the table. We've done, as Brad alluded to, a poor job traditionally of incorporating their resources as a part of the solution. Because it's very difficult, the major response is like building an airplane while it's flying. It's difficult to add parts, and the private sector represents particular challenges in that they have both needs and they also are a key to the success of the response and the recovery. The faster they get up, you can get your civil society back in order. But don't forget to include them when you're thinking about what do I need to do to plan for the next response or the recovery or my preparedness actions. They need to have a big seat at the table. They and I would add non-governmental organizations, the volunteer community. Again, they have been, some of the specific organizations have been incorporated a little more in the past, the ones but there's a whole large community out there that should be incorporated as well.
Great. Other questions, comments?
Just a comment on the involvement of private organizations. I'm Joe Usan from U.S. PACOM, J33, current operations. One of the things that the state has implemented over the years was this quarterly meeting that involves the private community, businesses, banks, etc., which allows us to share information on a quarterly basis as to where we're at. APEC was the subject that was recently discussed, how that was organized, the hot wash, the after-action reports, etc. This exercise that we're conducting now in Makanape-Healy, one of the parts of that exercise was to address the issue of the harbor. And we involved in that tabletop exercise Horizon, Matson, and Young Brothers, and the possibility of shifting the harbor from Honolulu over to Pearl Harbor. And of course, a memorandum of agreement would have to be established and then exercised so that that would go. Wanted to comment about large disasters. That is an issue that FEMA has recognized. As a matter of fact, they're calling it complex catastrophe. And there's a lot of issues that go with that, of course, authorities that the DoD has, where we can go, because the current authorities that we have in Defense Supportive Civil Authorities is that the lead federal agency has that lead, and we are in support, DoD is in support of that lead federal agency, usually FEMA. So if it is a large catastrophe, how do we get there quickly without imposing other or without conducting our normal business where there's a risk? Obviously, we're responsible for the defense of our nation. So if it's a complex catastrophe, how do we balance that risk of responding quickly with a large force while maintaining our main mission of defending the country? So there are issues that are being discussed in reference to complex catastrophes. One of the things that they implemented just last year was the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows reservists now to come into a domestic disaster. So the capabilities that they bring in a disaster are great, but then there are issues about funding. How do we fund reservists that are going to be there longer than 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera? So there are a lot of issues that are being discussed, but we are making progress in conducting tabletop exercises with private community, with others that are involved in this business. So I think this discussion here also helps.
Yeah, thank you. Other comments, questions? Yes.
All right, I'm Bob Harder from the City and County of Honolulu Department of Emergency Management. One of those locals referred to earlier. And just like Joe was mentioning, we were involved with the discussion on the harbors. And one of the questions we have is, how do you get the personal responsibility message out there? I mean, we've tried a variety of activities, whether it's through, for instance, a new website we have, getreadyhawaii.org, or, yes, that was a plug, or, variety of the, ready.gov, all those things that are out there. How do we reach out to the individuals? How do we get them to really think about doing the 7 days worth of supplies beforehand? We try to include their pets during those things. So I realize that's kind of on a local, and we've certainly seen this storm, but as you mentioned, all disasters start local and they're going to end local. Lots of help in there. So what are your recommendations from your experiences that you've seen to handle that?
I'll start. I think the most successful way of sort of reaching your target market is through the KK, through the kids. Growing up in California, earthquake preparedness started subtly by teachers pinning notes on us and having things and organizing activities that were ingrained into the school year and just became part of what we did. And I've seen that here. I split my time between California, Southern California, and here. That per capita, you spend a lot of money in California and in Hawaii on various threats. I don't know, what if you did a market survey, what the benefit is, but the things that have been successful have all been where they started, where you ingrain kids in school from day one. Duck, cover, and hold in California for earthquakes, as an outfall of the old civil defense drills. things of that nature. You have to kind of ingrain it in the culture. Bombing folks with information, infomercials, and public safety announcements are fine, but you can't change folks' behavior, you know, even in the face of the incident itself or after the incident. You have a very short window of time where you can increase readiness, but really you've got to look at it long term. It's a campaign, not a one-shot effort.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It's using a variety of tools. Obviously, social media, we heard people talking about it before. Great progress with that. Striking right after incidents because the public really wants to know right then. Working with the students. I mean, think about all the stuff. How many, I still remember, what was it, the Rocks cartoons when we were kids? Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Remember that? I still do that. When I'm writing, I'm going, no, dude, I'm singing the song. If I remember the Constitution, I start singing that song. But the stuff sets in our mind as kids. So, but it's working in all of these and understanding it's not going to be measured in miles. It's going to be measured in steps of feet. And I look at how far we've come with programs like CERT, Citizens Emergency Response Teams. I mean, pulling into neighborhoods now and seeing, you know, that have been hit by tornadoes, and here's these teams, I mean, lined up in an almost military fashion. Got their helmets, got their gear on, they're clearing the debris, the gas meters are shut off, half the work's done. And saying, wow, 5 years ago, never gonna happen. 10 years ago, you know, the programs were out there, but they weren't happening. It's making a progress, and we're getting, as long as we keep getting better and positive vector, that's the right vector. It's just, sometimes it'll go fast, sometimes it'll be little baby steps.
Let me mention one other example I remember from my childhood. How many people remember Checkers and Pogo? Okay, I remember Checkers and Pogo. They did handed out a comic book one time and even did an appearance in a program and mentioned, even when I was probably 3 or 4, 5, about something about hurricanes. I still remember that. In fact, probably in a box somewhere in my attic is that comic book. So that's just an example of how, you know, one effort like that is still with me 47 years later.
Reference, just looking at a foreign grouping, one of the things that they have found that has been really successful is the education of the children, because then they take that all the way through. And you know, some of the worst people that can nag you are your children to, you know, to stop smoking or do whatever. So they affect the parents and can get them, you know, create behavioral changes there. The other thing is, and unfortunately, if you have lots of disasters, you're going to be, you know, much more attuned to it and prepare accordingly. Here in Hawaii, I know what you mean. You know, you ask anybody, do they have a disaster kit? Have they, you know, done a plan or anything like this? Well, you know, every 20 years they may have something of significance, and that's very, very hard to get people up top dead center and to be thinking about disasters when we really don't have disasters here in Hawaii. And I applaud you for any effort that you can do there. But that's even out in the Pacific with most of the countries, if they don't have a lot of disasters, it's far from their mind, and it's very, very hard for them to get that message across. But I would say the kids are the key.
Okay, last comment or
Wait,
question?
last
Go ahead.
comment. The only comment, and maybe then you can close, but what I wanted to just add that the kids and all these activities at the public level are those great opportunities for the public and private partnerships, only because if we're looking at, for example, Lowe's, and Lowe's wants to do something to improve mitigation or to do something with schools, and really at these days we all are looking for funding. And so if there are ways that our community can partner or our businesses can partner to help sponsor activities or be involved in activities, whether you are a person who works for that company and then involve your kids, or you as the Home Depot want to do something on a broader scale. That's essentially the key to success. We're looking at something from a community on up, so from the bottom up. And to bring us back home to what Tom says, and looking at the bigger APEC arena, when APEC was here in November, there was a ministerial statement that basically asked all of us to look at private-public partnerships for disaster risk reduction. So, Carl.
I want to thank our response panelists and our great invited speakers. You heard this morning from the military, from government, federal, state, local perspectives. You heard from academia. We're going to hear from other voices too, from the small business perspective. We're going to hear from planning and other exciting speakers this afternoon. So please join us.